1 in 6 people will experience a toxic relationship with a narcissistic manipulator in their lifetime. But what's even more shocking is that most won't realize it until it's too late. You don't see it coming. At first, they seem perfect, loving, attentive, even magnetic. But slowly the cracks appear. You start to feel confused, doubtful, drained, like you're always the one at fault. That's not love. That's a psychological trap. And it has a name: a toxic relationship with a narcissistic abuser. Whether they call themselves your soulmate, your partner, or your savior, a true narcissistic manipulator knows how to play the role flawlessly. But behind the charm hides something far more dangerous: control, gaslighting, emotional erosion. And the worst part, you start to lose the one thing they feared most: your identity. Studies show that emotional abuse from a narcissist can have the same neurological impact as physical trauma. Let that sink in. This isn't just heartbreak. This is war on your mind, your self-worth, your peace. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. You can break them, silently, powerfully, and without ever raising your voice. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how. If you're in this situation, or if you've survived a toxic relationship with a perverse narcissist, a manipulator, a toxic partner, leave a like to show you're rising above it. And if you feel ready, share your experience below, or simply comment, "Thank you," to mark your first step toward liberation. Let's begin. In 1914, Sigmund Freud introduced the term Narcissism to describe a psychological state where a person is excessively focused on themselves. But centuries before Freud, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned, "It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." He was already describing how manipulators, those we now call narcissists, reshape reality to dominate your perception. Fast forward to today, and neuroscience backs this up. Studies using fMRI scans reveal that people with narcissistic personality traits show reduced activity in the anterior insula, a brain region responsible for empathy. In short, their brains are literally wired for emotional detachment. Not everyone who hurts you is a narcissist, but when they are, science and philosophy agree. They know what they're doing. Carl Jung once said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." Narcissists are often charming, magnetic, even inspiring at first. That's the trap. Research from the American Psychological Association shows that narcissists score higher in initial attractiveness in group dynamics. But over time, their appeal turns into toxicity. You felt it. That shift. One day, you're praised like a savior. The next, discarded like a stranger. Why? Because for the narcissist, relationships are tools. People are mirrors. And once you stop reflecting their inflated image, you become irrelevant, or worse, a threat. Harvard Medical School estimates that around 6.2% of the population suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. That's millions of people. But only a fraction are officially diagnosed, because true narcissists rarely seek help. Why would they? In their story, you are the problem. They rewrite reality. And the more you question yourself, the more power they gain. This is not a coincidence. It's a pattern. And you're not imagining it. Take this in. A study published in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin showed that narcissists tend to use 4 key strategies to control others: idealization, devaluation, gaslighting, and discard. It's psychological warfare, masked as affection. One moment you feel chosen, seen, even saved. The next, you're doubting your worth, questioning your memory, begging for scraps of attention. Sound familiar? That's because it's scripted. Narcissists repeat these cycles almost identically across relationships. But here's what most people don't know. The very tactics they use to control you are also their weaknesses. Their need to dominate comes from a deep, often hidden, fear of being ordinary. Psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula explains that narcissists are profoundly insecure. Underneath the armor lies emptiness. They need validation the way lungs need air. And once you stop supplying it, their world shakes. Not always visibly, but deeply. You'll see it in their sudden anger, their frantic attempts to regain control, their smear campaigns. That's not strength. It's panic. Seneca once wrote, "The man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." When you live under a narcissist's spell, you suffer from their future attacks even before they happen. That's their genius and their curse. Because as you start to awaken, something shifts. You begin to notice the lies, the contradictions, the empty apologies. You start asking, is it me? Or is this madness? That moment, right there, is the beginning of their unraveling. What's even more powerful is what neuroscience says about you. Studies on trauma bonding, particularly in narcissistic relationships, show that the brain releases oxytocin and cortisol in extreme emotional cycles. That means your attachment to the narcissist is chemically reinforced by chaos. The abuse and the intimacy are biologically tangled. So no, you're not weak. You're human. Your brain is reacting exactly as designed. But once you become aware of it, you gain control. And the Stoics? They knew this inner war well. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminds us, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it. Narcissists feed on your judgment, on your need to make sense of their nonsense. The moment you detach, not emotionally, but philosophically, they lose their grip. It's not about fighting harder. It's about seeing clearer. So if you've ever felt like you were losing your mind around someone who once adored you, if you've ever been blamed for their cruelty, or silenced for questioning their double standards, know this, you're not alone. You're not broken. You were caught in a system so old, even the ancients wrote about it. But now you're seeing it. And that vision is the beginning of your power. In the next part, we'll expose why narcissists choose people like you, and what secret strengths you hold that terrify them. What if everything you thought was your weakness was the very thing that could destroy them? Let's go deeper. It's not random. It never was. Narcissists don't just fall into relationships, they hunt. They observe. They study. And when they choose someone, it's rarely because of superficial attraction. It's because they see something they can use. You. But not just anyone. People like you. Dr. Craig Malkin, a clinical psychologist and lecturer at Harvard Medical School, explains that narcissists seek what he calls egoists, people who are highly empathic, conflict-averse, and deeply uncomfortable with attention. Why? Because egoists are givers. They tend to feel responsible for others' emotions. That makes them ideal fuel. But also deeply dangerous because once awakened. Part 2, why they pick you. The truth they don't want you to discover. You might think they chose you by chance. That it was just bad timing. But here's the truth. Narcissists don't operate randomly. They scan, test, and select. And they almost always choose the kindest people in the room. People with empathy. People who reflect light without needing to steal it. That's what terrifies them. And that's exactly why they pick you. Psychologist Dr. Craig Malkin, a Harvard Medical School lecturer, explains that narcissists are hyper-attuned to others' emotional energy. It might sound mystical, but it's biology. Their limbic system, especially the amygdala, registers threat or safety not through logic, but through emotion. And when they meet someone like you who radiates warmth, attentiveness, compassion, it feels safe at first. Until your light starts to reveal their shadow. That's when things shift. You may think, I was too naive, too trusting, too available. But the truth is far more empowering. They targeted you because you were trusting. Because you had something they lacked, authenticity. Neuroscience tells us that narcissists suffer from an identity vacuum. Their self-image is built like a mirror maze, reflecting only what others feed into it. When they find someone with a solid sense of compassion, with values, with inner richness, they feel drawn like a moth to flame. But the flame doesn't just warm, it burns. Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Except with narcissists, only one of you is meant to transform. Them? Never. You. Completely. That's their unspoken goal. Slowly mold you. Shape you. Undermine your intuition so you become more reactive, more dependent, more uncertain. Why? Because a clear, independent mind is their greatest threat. Here's what's truly haunting. Studies from the University of Georgia found that people high in narcissistic traits tend to idealize their partners in the beginning phase of a relationship, but once intimacy deepens, they begin devaluing them. Why? Because intimacy brings exposure. And when you start to see behind the performance, they panic. They resent the fact that you can see their inconsistencies, their manipulations, their flaws. So they turn to offense. Preemptive attacks. Emotional sabotage. Not because you've changed, but because you've noticed. Freud once noted that narcissists don't fall in love with others. They fall in love with how others see them. And the moment you stop feeding the illusion, you become disposable. Or worse, dangerous. That's why the discard phase feels so violent. It's not just rejection, it's a desperate attempt to erase your perception. But here's something they never expect. The very traits they try to use against you, your empathy, your vulnerability, your willingness to see the good, are also your armor. Not against them directly, but against becoming like them. You can recover. You can grow. You can reflect without collapsing. That's a kind of strength they can't comprehend. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote, "It is the nature of the wise to resist pleasures, but the foolish to be a slave to them." Narcissists are slaves to ego pleasure. They need admiration like oxygen. You, on the other hand, know how to endure. You know how to hold space in the storm. That's why they need you, and why they hate you once they realize they can't truly own you. Let this sink in. Narcissists don't destroy people randomly. They destroy what they envy. They see your depth, your emotional language, your quiet ability to heal others, and it infuriates them. Because no matter how much control they gain, they cannot replicate your light. That's why they punish it. Not because you failed them, but because you reminded them of everything they can't be. But now you're beginning to see. To put the puzzle together. Maybe for the first time, you're realizing this wasn't love. It was hunger, and you were the feast. That clarity, that's your awakening. And in that awakening, something powerful happens. You begin to stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What part of me made me their target?" Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim your power. Because once you understand what made you their obsession, you learn to guard it. You learn to refine it. And more importantly, you learn how to turn it against them, not with revenge, but with unshakable awareness. In the next part, we'll dive into how to use that awareness as a weapon, breaking their psychological grip with strategies backed by real neuroscience and Stoic force. There is a way out, but even more, there's a way to reverse the pain into power. And it starts by understanding exactly what breaks their mask. There's something deeply unsettling about watching a narcissist unravel. One moment they're composed, magnetic, invincible. The next, they're twitching under pressure, their words fumbling, their charm cracking like thin glass. What causes that shift? It's not your anger. It's not your confrontation. It's your clarity. When you become calm, centered, and unshakable, something in them breaks. Not visibly at first, but internally, their carefully constructed mask begins to collapse. And that's when you see the truth. Narcissists don't fear hate, they fear indifference. Neuroscientific studies have shown that narcissists have abnormally high levels of activity in the default mode network of the brain, regions responsible for self-referential thinking and ego construction. This means they live in a constant mental loop centered on themselves. They interpret everything through the lens of me. Praise validates them. Criticism destroys them. But the one thing they can't process is neutrality. Your emotional detachment isn't a silence to them, it's an attack. Because it denies their existence. Psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula explains that narcissists feed off narcissistic supply. Attention, emotional reaction, drama, validation. When you stop reacting, you starve them. This is not a metaphor. Brain scans reveal that their dopamine reward circuits activate when they receive praise or cause emotional chaos. You become their drug. And when you go cold, it feels like withdrawal. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Panic. Rage. Emptiness. That's your leverage. So what are the weapons? The first, and perhaps most powerful, is radical silence. Not passive aggression. Not sulking. True silence, the kind that comes from clarity, not fear. When you stop explaining yourself, stop defending, stop trying to be understood, you shift the power dynamic. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injustice." When you refuse to mirror their chaos, they lose control of the script. They spiral. Because they can't figure out how to control someone who's no longer trying to win. Next is psychological mirroring, a technique rooted in modern therapy, but as old as human interaction. You reflect back their words, not with sarcasm, but with precision. When they say, "You're always overreacting," you reply, "That's interesting." You say that often. What makes you believe that? Now they're on the defensive. You've shifted the frame. Instead of absorbing their accusation, you turn it into a question. This subtle redirection forces their brain into cognitive dissonance. They're no longer dominating, you're making them explain. Narcissists hate explaining. They operate best in ambiguity. Shine light, and the illusion fades. Then comes gray rocking, a tactic named for its dull, boring image. You become emotionally flat. Not robotic, but neutral. You answer their provocations without flavor. "Okay, I see. That's your opinion." You don't feed the fire. You become uninteresting, predictable, and that's psychological death for a narcissist. They don't just crave attention, They require it to maintain their sense of identity. Strip that away, and their mask begins to suffocate them. And yet, one of the most underestimated weapons is self-investment. Yes, it sounds soft, but hear this: when you start doing better, physically, socially, emotionally, without their presence, it inflicts a kind of wound they can't admit. Not because you're improving, but because you're improving without them. A narcissist's greatest fear isn't losing you. It's realizing they never had the power they thought they had, that you can rebuild, that your life isn't anchored to their approval. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That's the core of narcissism, a lifelong avoidance of self. But when you grow, when you set boundaries, when you glow in their absence, you become a mirror too sharp to look into. That's what breaks them. Let's not forget exposure. Not public humiliation. That often backfires. But subtle exposure. Ask questions they can't answer in front of others. Let their contradictions show through. For example, when they lie about something trivial, ask casually, "Didn't you say something different last week?" Not accusatory. Curious. That tone matters, because now others start to notice. And narcissists depend on the illusion of superiority. Crack that image even slightly, and their panic multiplies behind the mask. Now here's the warning. When you use these tactics, expect retaliation. At first. Not because they're strong, but because they're scared. The smear campaigns, the gaslighting, the attempts to guilt trip you into reacting again. That's proof it's working. The more control you reclaim, the more desperate they become. But now you have something more powerful than their manipulation. You have insight. You know the mechanics. You understand the reactions. And slowly, they become predictable. Boring. Powerless. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. For he is not permitted to prove himself." This is your proving ground. Not to destroy someone else, but to build a self that can never again be broken by illusion. In the next part, we go even deeper into their greatest fear: your absence, your silence, your disengagement. Because walking away doesn't just protect you, it damages them in a way they cannot repair. And you'll finally understand why that's the ultimate power. Most people think narcissists fear confrontation, that they hate being exposed, shouted at, or cornered. But the real fear runs deeper. Their greatest terror isn't your anger. It's your absence. The moment you walk away, without explanation, without reaction, without begging, you become a mirror they can no longer manipulate. And that is devastating to them. Neuroscience offers us a shocking insight here. A study from the University of Michigan found that social rejection activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. Now imagine this effect amplified in a brain that's pathologically dependent on admiration. Narcissists don't just dislike rejection, they crumble under it. Because your presence was never about you, it was about the reflection you provided. You were their stage, their validation, their lifeline to relevance. Walking away doesn't just leave them alone. It makes them invisible. Dr. Carol McBride, expert in narcissistic abuse recovery, explains that narcissists view people as emotional vending machines. You push the right buttons, they give you what you want. But when you stop responding, when you no longer plead, argue, or even acknowledge them, you've broken the machine. You've done something they have no playbook for. You've ended the performance. Here's what's even more damaging to them: the quiet departure. Not the dramatic exit, not the explosive confrontation, but the silent, grounded decision to leave without drama. That's what echoes. That's what keeps them up at night. Because it tells them that you saw everything, and you still didn't care enough to fight. It's not hate, it's indifference. And that indifference strikes at the core of their illusion of power. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." Narcissists know this instinctively. They provoke, manipulate, bait. Because the more you resist their behavior, the more engaged you stay. Even in anger, you're feeding them. That's why walking away, without resistance, isn't just an exit. It's a cutoff. Not just from contact, but from supply, from fuel. And that starving silence? It forces them to face something they've spent their entire lives avoiding: themselves. Stoic wisdom reinforces this principle. Epictetus taught that freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Your reaction? That's under your control. Your peace? Yours alone. When you walk away from a narcissist, you reclaim the one thing they tried to strip from you: your sovereignty. And it terrifies them. Because now, they can no longer shape your narrative. They can no longer distort your reality. You've left the stage and taken the spotlight with you. But there's more. Studies on trauma bonds reveal that intermittent reinforcement, the cycle of love bombing and devaluation, creates addiction-like responses in the brain. That's why leaving a narcissist often feels harder than walking away from someone who physically abused you. The emotional highs and lows create a biochemical dependence. And yet, when you do break free, the recovery isn't just emotional, it's neurochemical. Your brain literally begins to rewire. Your cortisol drops. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reason and clarity, reactivates. You see clearer. You breathe deeper. And what does the narcissist feel in that moment? Not regret, not guilt, but rage. Why? Because they've lost control of the image. They can no longer dictate how you see them, how others see them, or, most importantly, how they see themselves. The vacuum you leave behind is deafening. Here's the paradox. The more quietly and confidently you walk away, the louder your absence becomes. They'll attempt to punish you. They may spread lies, twist facts, or reach out with false promises. Not because they've changed, but because they want to pull you back into the game. Resist. Because every second you stay away, you're training your nervous system to live without fear. You're teaching your mind that peace is possible. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Walking away is the most courageous act in a narcissist's world. Because it says, I no longer need you to validate me. I no longer need to be seen by you to exist. That declaration, though silent, is louder than any scream. If you've ever walked away and doubted yourself, let this be your reminder. Your absence is not weakness. It's strategy. It's healing. And most of all, it's the one move they cannot manipulate, predict, or reverse. You didn't just leave a person. You left a system, a cycle, a cage. In the next part, we'll go deeper into how to reclaim your power without speaking a word, how silence, self-mastery, and visible growth become tools of quiet transformation. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like happiness. They expect a fight. They're ready for your rage, your confusion, your desperate need for closure. That's how the narcissist survives, by pulling you back into the theater, into the emotion, into the endless monologue where they always win. But what they never expect is silence. Not passive silence, powerful silence. The kind that isn't about avoidance, but dominance. Stillness with intent. Disconnection without explanation. That's not just absence. That's war on their terms, and you're winning. Modern psychology has a term for this: emotional detachment with presence. It means you're still in the room, still visible, still active, but no longer accessible. And for a narcissist, this is hell. Dr. Joe Dispenza's neuroscience research shows that when we stop reacting emotionally to a trigger, the brain literally begins to rewire itself. Neural pathways that once fired through fear, anxiety, or shame begin to dissolve. Your silence isn't just a message to them, it's a recalibration of you. Seneca wrote, "He is most powerful who has power over himself." That's the beginning of real, quiet control. You don't need revenge. You don't need to explain. You don't even need to be understood. Your lack of response becomes the loudest truth in the room. And here's why. Narcissists thrive on visibility. If you're not watching, not reacting, not praising or challenging, their entire internal world starts to collapse. They feel irrelevant. And for someone built entirely on performance, irrelevance is the deepest wound. It starts when you no longer play the role. When you stop defending your character, justifying your choices, or asking for fairness. Because fairness doesn't exist in their system. It's a weapon, not a value. Your silence removes that weapon from the table. Suddenly, they're playing a game with no opponent. Their manipulation hits a wall. And in that void, you regain everything they tried to take: your clarity, your energy, your narrative. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The moment you reclaim your energy without speaking, you become conscious. You're no longer trapped in their projection. You see the puppet strings. And you cut them, not with words, but with withdrawal. And yet, that withdrawal doesn't mean disappearing. It means rising. Think of it this way. Every move you make now becomes a statement. You start reading again, working out, building your life, laughing without explanation, posting, creating, living, not for them, but despite them. And when they see that, when they see you existing fully outside of their influence, that's the wound they don't recover from. Because it proves the unthinkable, they never broke you. There's a psychological phenomenon called social proof. It's how we validate truth through the reactions of others. Narcissists weaponize this by controlling your image. But now, without a word, you reverse it. When you rise socially, emotionally, even professionally, they begin to lose credibility. You don't have to expose them. You just have to exist better. Here's the twist. People around them start to notice. When you stop reacting, their tactics grow more desperate. They speak louder, manipulate harder, trying to trigger you. And when you remain unbothered, that contrast exposes them without you saying anything. The more dignified your silence, the more obvious their dysfunction becomes. You become the evidence, not a witness, not a victim, a living, breathing contrast. The Stoics call this apatheia, a state not of indifference but of inner mastery. Epictetus taught, if someone does wrong, it is because they believe it is right. Don't argue, just live rightly. That's what they can't stand. Your refusal to collapse. Your refusal to explain. That calm, collected glow you carry after the storm. It's magnetic, and it's irreversible. And maybe the most painful part for them? You don't hate them. You don't obsess. You don't even need them to know you're doing well. You just are. That breaks the cycle. That ends the loop. Because your recovery isn't a performance, it's a return to who you were before they distorted the mirror. If you're wondering why they come back, why they suddenly reach out just when you're starting to heal, remember this. It's not love. It's radar. Narcissists can sense your empowerment like sharks smell blood in water. Except this time, it's not weakness they detect. It's strength. And they're terrified. In the next and final part, we go deeper. We pull from the wisdom of the ancients, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and show you how to turn every scar into strategy, how to embrace stoic revenge. Not through destruction, but through evolution. Because the most devastating thing you can do to a narcissist is become everything they told you you'd never be. They wanted to break you. That was the unspoken goal from the beginning. Not in one sudden move, but slowly, subtly, through doubt, through shame, through manipulation disguised as love. They didn't just want you silent. They wanted you small, dependent, forgetful of your own worth. And for a time, maybe they succeeded. But now you're awake. You've seen the pattern, and something irreversible has happened. You've started to detach, not from them, but from their game. That's the beginning of stoic revenge. Not reaction. Transformation. Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And that's the entire strategy. You don't win by out-manipulating a narcissist. You win by becoming untouchable. And untouchable doesn't mean cold, cruel, or distant. It means rooted, whole, fully alive, and fully free. The kind of person who no longer dances to the rhythm of approval or fear. That is power they cannot mimic, and it enrages them. Neuroscience confirms that deep emotional abuse, like the kind inflicted by narcissists, reshapes the brain. The hippocampus, which governs memory, and the amygdala, which processes fear, are both affected. But the brain is plastic. It can heal. In fact, studies from the University of Wisconsin showed that consistent mindfulness and values-based living reverse these neurological scars. This is not just emotional recovery. It's physical. Your brain rewires itself when you choose meaning over reaction. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience. Seneca wrote, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." That's what narcissists exploit, your fears, your desires. But once you learn to detach from both, they lose control. You stop being predictable. You stop being a mirror. You become a window to something far greater, a life they can't touch, influence, or poison. But here's where it gets beautiful. Everything they used to hurt, you can now become your greatest fuel. The gaslighting? It taught you to trust your intuition like never before. The manipulation? It sharpened your awareness of subtle emotional shifts in others. The discard? It forced you to rebuild, on your own terms. Each wound they inflicted now becomes a lesson you carry forward. Not as baggage, as armor. And when you start to live from that place, quietly powerful, anchored, stoic, they feel it. Even if you never speak to them again, they know. Because their game only works when you play it. Your evolution is the only proof you need that you've won. No confrontation necessary. No drama. Just growth. And that's the kind of revenge that multiplies over time. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That's stoic revenge. Choosing. Choosing to be still where you once reacted. Choosing to be disciplined where you once collapsed. Choosing to build a life so full, so vivid, so purposeful, that their memory becomes a footnote, not a chapter. And yes, they may try to return. They always do. Narcissists circle back not out of love, but curiosity. To see if the door is still open. To test if your growth was a performance or permanent. And when they find the door sealed, the silence unbroken, the energy calm, it crushes them. Not because you were cruel, but because you were unchanged by their storm. You found the eye of it and stayed there. This is the moment you realize you never needed to destroy them. You only needed to outgrow them. And you did. The Stoics taught us to turn every obstacle into fuel. Marcus Aurelius called it, "The obstacle is the way." So let their cruelty become your discipline. Let their lies make you a seeker of truth. Let their chaos lead you into order. You didn't just survive the narcissist. You used them as the pressure that forged you, as the mirror that showed you who you never want to become. Now look at yourself, wiser, sharper, more awake, and ask, what will I do with this clarity? Because true Stoic revenge doesn't end in healing. It begins there. It's the life you live after, the purpose you find, the strength you carry, not to prove something to them, but to become everything they feared you would. And now you're free.